All right, so today we're going to start looking at working with images in HTML, and it's very straightforward in a lot of ways. We're gonna start with the very straightforward part, but then we're going to move into some other things that we can do. I'll show you a couple of tools you can use. There's a lot of tools out there depending upon what your operating system is. Sometimes they'll come with one, sometimes the one it comes with isn't worth it. It just kind of depends on what you're doing. Um, and then there's some online versions you can use and some different things. So we'll look at all those different things just as a starting point. We're going to look at what's known as the image tag, which is the simplest form of way of displaying an image. And then on Thursday, we'll look at like the picture tag and be able to put captions and stuff like that with images. So that just kind of gives you a overview of where we're going with all this. So when you work with an image, there's a couple different types of images that you can run into um, and see. Get back to where I was here. Um, no matter what type of image you're going to work with, though, you're going to use the image tag. And the image tag is simply IMG. It's obviously it's an abbreviated form of image, and it is one of those tags that has a required attribute. It also has a strongly suggested or recommended attribute. So the required attribute is the SRC, or the source attribute. And this says, where do we find our image? The strongly requested attribute is known as the alt. And this is short for alternative text. And this is text that would display if someone cannot view a web page. They're visually impaired, and so they're using like a screen reader. Most browsers don't have the ability to turn off images anymore, but sometimes if an image hasn't loaded yet, you'll see a little bit of text. That's usually the alt text. So it's very important to describe the image. That way, if someone can't see it because the image is broken, or they have a visual impairment, and the computer has to read to them what the image is, the computer can't say, oh, this is two people playing chess, or this is a horse gallivanting across the prairie, or anything like that. You have to be able to tell it that. And so that's what that's there for. Now, there are a couple different types of images out there, and we're going to look at some of those in just a little bit. But all of them use the IMG tag, or almost all of them use the IMG tag. So that makes it very easy for us. So whether we change an image to be a different type of image, or if we have a bunch of different types of images on a page or throughout our site, it all works. Okay. Now, one of the things that I like to do, and I'm going to come over here just to kind of show you. This is a website. I actually have a license for this website. Let's see what comes up. Oh, come on. It's running really slow today. Of course it is. You know, it was working earlier, but does it work now? No. All right. And this could just be because I'm doing a bunch of stuff myself. This is called Stock Unlimited, and it is what is known as a stock image website. So they have lots of photos that they have had people submit and take and stuff. If you look, you can kind of tell that some of these were taken with the same people, like this one and this one is the same person, just different angle. This one is also, as well as this one, just little changes and different ideas to get it. And so you might go in and need to take a photo like this. Let me log in real quick. And I'm going to Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what happens when we go and download an image and say, hey, I'm building a site for a restaurant. It's not open yet, so I can't obviously take photos of it. So we're going to use some stock images that we can use in order to get the same look and feel for what we're looking at. So let's say I want to pick this image right here. This is, kind of a good idea. Someone's taken down notes, or I might have something like this where it looks like they're ordering and you can kind of see stuff. There's a couple different things you can pick from. We'll pick this one. This is a nice generic looking one. Two generic people looking to access it. And I'm going to download this image real quick.
I don't know if you see, but we cannot see your screen. You're not sharing.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I am so sorry.
No, you're fine.
Okay, so this was the file I picked. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. This is the file I picked. It is, two generic people having, trying to figure out what to order for lunch. So this is a perfect example of, just a stock photo you could use. I could also, of course, pick maybe something like, I don't know, a plate of food or just a variety of different things I could pick. Let me go. And you can do a wide search for things. You can say, I want to get oops, that's Orient Restaurant. I can do very generic stuff, like just show me people. And, now I get lots of people and I can see, people working or people in a business setting or, and I can put extra groups of stuff in to kind of figure things out. And with this one, I can choose between images or photos, if you would, as well as like vectors. And a vector image is going to be one that you typically would expect for kind of like a cartoon type look. Did I hit the search? I failed to hit the search button. So here you can see you have, cartoon looking people and stuff like that. Okay, so depending upon what you're trying to do and what you're trying to look like, depends upon what style you're going to go for. Some people prefer this style and they build their whole website on it. Some people pick a different one. Close that down. I'm going to download this one as well. Okay. While those download, let me come down here to my downloads folder. Here's my downloads for today. And I'm going to bring them over into my file that is in here that I've been using and kind of showing you is okay. Yeah, it's this one, and it's inside of my temp folder. So I like to keep things organized. So I am going to create a subfolder for my images for to put my web pages in. Okay, so I've got a temp folder for my images. If I bring these up, you can see they're the ones I just downloaded. I have the one of the kind of business people in a cartoony look, and then I also have one of people ordering, generic people ordering at a generic restaurant type thing. Okay. One of these you'll notice that the file type is called PNG. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, just a little bit. And the other is JPEG, JPG, which is short for JPEG. Okay. So if I want to look at ordering or look at putting these on inside of a web page, what I'll do is real simple. I'm just going to insert that image tag. And I'll say img src equals, and then I need to say, okay, I'm going into a subfolder. So I'll say images, which is my folder name, / and then my file. In this case, 1926751.jpg. So notice that I kind of kept the name up here just out of the corner so I could come down here and put it in there and see it and make sure I got it right. Now, usually I'm going to go through the process of like renaming files to make them easier to work with and make them easier to see and stuff like that. Just for simplicity's sake, I kept it the original file name. I'm going to put in my alt tag anytime that if I want to be in the United States, it's called 503 compliant. It's just a section of our Americans for Disabilities Act, which is the rules that the U.S. uses to make sure that people with disabilities still have equal and fair access to buildings, to access to websites, access to all the different stuff. The ADA covers a wide variety of things. So it's the rule. Under that is rules for like you have to have wheelchair ramps to get into commercial buildings, and you can't have aisles that are so close. Otherwise, it will cause people not to be able to get through if they're on crutches and stuff. And everyone needs to be able to access these things. The 503 is a section that deals with digital electronic components. So we want to have the alt tags so that way we're compliant with that. If you're in Europe, they have a different set of rules under the EU. Their rules are actually a little bit more stringent, which is a little bit harder to maintain, especially for a smaller developer or a smaller project, small companies, that type of thing. But they are just a little bit more protective of people with special needs. So that's why their rules are more stringent. So in this case, I'm just going to say, two people ordering at a restaurant. The image tag does not have a closing image tag. It's just going to sit there all by itself. If I come here and save this, and then say view, current file in Chrome, it's going to launch, and here is my file. And you might go, wait a second, what happened to this? This is like just a part of the person, okay? And what happened to the rest of him? And there was supposed to be this girl there too. If I look, I got a scroll bar down at the bottom. You see how big this image is, right? It's just overwhelming the size of everything. So why on earth is it there? Well, the reason why it's so big like this is because the image, when we download it from a stock site, and anytime you download an image from a stock site, or if you get an image out of the camera, they tend to be like just these really large images, way too big for a website to use. Now I can go in with CSS and I can resize this down, but I still have to download this really big file. I'm going to prefer to have a smaller file that's only as big as it needs to be, rather than try to resize in something like CSS. Now, I might make some modifications in CSS to adjust and kind of tweak, but overall, I'm looking to get it mostly right somewhere else. That's what I want to show right now. The other thing I'm going to specify, and I just want to kind of show you real quick, is if you come here, you notice I said two people ordering at a restaurant. I didn't specify, if their race or their age or even if they were male or female or anything like that. The reason why is if that's not important to what the image is about, then we want to avoid referencing it to reduce the chances of us um, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, causing any undue hardship or making people think that we're biased or biasing people based upon our descriptions of them. So unless we need to specify that it's the person's young or old or uh, you know what their race is or ethnicity or religion, anything like that, we generally will try to avoid it. Now, if it's a case where there's a specific instance, and let's say you had a Catholic priest, and uh, that was part of the story. A Catholic priest is leading mass. Um, in a case like that, then it's okay to specify that as a Catholic priest because that's specific to what's actually going on in the story. But you don't have to necessarily specify, anything else about the priest. Once again, unless it's specific about the story or unique to that image. So, those are things that we want to keep in mind. Now, I use a tool called Photoshop, and I use it for a lot of stuff. And this was literally a blank screen I had to create in Photoshop a little while ago. um, but I can create other stuff obviously as well. This tends to be pretty expensive though, and so I'm not going to show you Photoshop. Is this? I think you got to pay like $50 a month for nowadays. It's absolutely ridiculous. Adobe is just way too big for their britches. So I'm going to go to Paint.net, which is used for Windows, which is really really nice. I'm just going to go to this download, get it free. You got to kind of avoid these downloads. Those are just ads. So I'm going to come here to the Paint downloader. It is paid under the Microsoft Store. Don't ask me why, but it's free if you download it from this website. And free download now. This is going to download the file. It's like 10 megs. It's really, really small, which is nice. And why isn't it opening? There we go. Okay. I was starting to get a little panicked. So Paint.net is, like I said, completely free. It was an idea to take Paint, the program, and just make it more powerful. And they did a really, really good job. This actually started off as a senior project with a mentor from someone from Microsoft. So this was an undergraduate senior project that I started off on. Now that was way back like version 1. They're on version 4.2 right now. And it does periodic updates. It's actively being maintained. So I'm very happy about that. If you do it through the Microsoft Store, apparently you get automatic updates. Otherwise, you get a notice when you run it. If you don't have a huge budget, you don't have lots of money, this becomes a very functional free tool if you're on a Windows platform. If you're not on Windows, if you have a Mac, then you need to pick a Mac-based program to use. And I'm not familiar with what image editors are out there on the Mac. I can't specify or talk to that. But what we're going to do is we're going to load up this image inside of Paint.net, resize it to make it a lot smaller, which is going to, right now, you notice this is 4.1 megs. By making the dimensions smaller, it's also going to make not only it fit better on our web page, but it's also going to make it so that the file downloads much, much faster, especially when you're downloading from the internet. So I'm going to make a copy of these just so I have the originals. I can come right here and say open. Images. Here's the one I want to open. Okay. If I go to image and choose resize, this just works really well for resizing. And I'm going to say I want this to be only 750 pixels wide. Okay. So it will automatically resize the height and the width. Most imaging software will do that for you. You don't have to worry about the resolution. A resolution is pixels per inch. On a web page, that has no bearing whatsoever. It only cares about the absolute pixels. The resolution does not matter when it comes to a web page. This matters if you want to print something out onto like a printed sheet of paper, is you want to keep your resolution up higher so that it prints clearer onto paper. But like I said, on a web page, does not matter. Click and say OK. You'll notice that it didn't look like it changed much. That's because it resized based upon what it saw inside the screen. I'm going to save this. You can save as a JPEG. It's going to save as different qualities. So I can have an example here, 95% quality, which is really good. And that quality says, it's almost as good as what way it was originally when it first came out of the camera. If I come down here, notice at 0 quality, my file got a lot smaller. But notice how big and clunky it is. How there's like no detail at all to it. And there's going to be somewhere that happy medium between really large file, 285 kilobytes, 95 cuts out almost in under half, 131. I can go to like, where was I? 85 and be 73 kilobytes. So that's still a very good looking image, but it's going to be much faster than saving it at 100%. Even if we saved it at 100%, that would have been so much better than that original 4.1 kilobyte size. If I come back here and reload my image, now when I see this on my web page, it looks like it fits. Okay, I don't have big scrolling. I can see the whole image. I get that inclination. Now, there's more things I can do to it to make it fit into my web page better. And that's one of the things I'm going to want to do. I'm going to want to make it so that I have text that goes around it. I'm going to want to be able to maybe move from left side to right side or have it centered. That's all stuff we'll deal with in just a few minutes. But for now, I have a faster downloading file because it's much smaller. And I have a file that I can view it the whole time on my image, or excuse me, on my web page, because my image isn't like just so tremendously just exploding up in size. So that's a real good thing as far as how that goes, and that's exactly how I want it to look and work. Okay. Now, some people say, well, if I've got a large file, that's going to affect my bandwidth on my server. And so I'm just going to, why don't I just pull an image off of another person's web server? If I got that image, stock library that I can pull from, why not just link directly from that? Well, a lot of web hosts nowadays will automatically block someone trying to view a web page or view an image on a web page where the web page didn't also originate from where that host originated. So that's to save their bandwidth. That makes total sense, right? So you can't do that a lot of times, which is why it's also important to make sure that you save the file as efficiently as you can, because you don't want to blow up what your downloads are. My wife has a website that I built for her, and we've done some things to optimize it, and I get an optimization report where we've actually put the images intentionally on a different server, and that's to actually speed it up so things download from different websites at the same time and stuff. And every month I get an email that says how much bandwidth we saved, and we typically save between 1.4 and 1.8 gigabytes in bandwidth. So your images are going to actually eat up most of your bandwidth. Typically, you can expect images, assuming you don't have audio and video. But if you just have plain text and images, your images are typically going to be between 80 and 95% of the overall amount of download bandwidth that your website uses. So something to kind of keep in mind when you're working on your site. And do I need to have that image? Does it need to be that big? Knowing that it's going to affect your bandwidth, overall download amounts, your bandwidth at that instant time, which too many images being downloaded by too many people will slow down your server. And that means it's going to slow down for the end user and what they experience. Okay, so that's just kind of the first type of things. Let's look at adding some styles and things that we can do. And some of these are going to be important because I may not, I might assume that a person is going to look at a web page on their computer, but they might pick it up and view it on their phone or their tablet or something like that. So let's look at some styles that we can apply that are pretty standard that will also make working with this image a whole lot easier. Okay, so step one, I'm going to come back into here to my text file, and I'm going to add a couple of CSS styles. The first one I'm going to do is for my image in general. And here I'm going to say max width. And max width is just letting the browser know how's the maximum width that I can get any image whatsoever. So by saying max width 100%, that's saying that you cannot be bigger than the window that my web page is in, or whatever its containing element is. So my containing element might be only a third the size. Well, that means that the image can be no more than a third the size. Now, this does not resize the image. It just changes how it's displayed. It's the exact same image. So if I come here and reload this, you'll notice it looks the same, but if I resize it, notice that as my little browser window gets smaller, my image never starts to cause it to scroll, okay? It resizes with the size of my window. Now, as my window gets larger, because this specified max width, not width, max width, because it specifies max width, it's just saying how big can this image get. If the image is already smaller than my window size or my container size, then it stays smaller. And that's another important distinction, because I have two different properties which are very similar: max width and width. Width is like an absolute, how wide is this? Max width says, I don't care how small you are, just don't go bigger than this. I also do have a min width that says, you can't be less than whatever amount I put in there. In that case, it will always, it will resize up and make it larger if it needs to be. Two other ones that I like to have this on all of my web pages when I create them. That's just something I always have. That way I'm ready to use it in case I need it. I'm also always going to create something called image left and image right. And you'll see this called slightly different things in different places. But this is a real big one that I like to use. So image, this is going to be a class, image just left. And this is if I want to take my image and push it over to my left-hand side, which is probably that way for you. Okay, so if I want to push it to my left-hand side of my web page or of my containing element, I'm going to apply this image left class. And there's two big things it's going to do for me. The first thing is I'm going to specify float left. Now, a lot of times if I have text on a web page, if I just put an image in there, my text moves to like the bottom line, and I'll only see one line of text, huge big empty gap, one line of text, and then the rest of the text goes below it. That's a real problem. By using the float, if you remember when we talked about floats earlier, a float takes it out of the normal flow of our web page so that text can wrap around an image or any other element. And this could be a different container element, but it can wrap around it. So that's what a float is for. The problem is because text is going to float around it, it's going to try to butt up right up against it. And that's going to make sometimes that text hard to read, especially the first letter of those first words. So therefore, I'm always going to put a margin to my right-hand side to separate my image from my text. So I'm just going to say margin right. And usually something small like 10 pixels is all it needs. Okay. Now, if I reload, you notice nothing happened. And that's because this was a class. We have not applied the class to the image yet. So let me come back down here to my image. Class equals image left. I resize it, or excuse me, I reload it now, and you'll notice that here my my description list now appears beside my image. Okay, because I took the image out of the regular flow, and now I have my text that goes beside it. So this becomes really nice if I want to have things wrapped. I've got this little bit of space, so it's still easy to read. If I put this and I had zero margin by default, I'd have zero margin. That text would go right up against it and make it much, much harder to read. This keeps it nice and simple and easy to read, and that's a really important thing in my book. Okay. So that's two of the three styles that I always create no matter what website I'm building. The other one is going to be image right. This is also going to be a class, and it's going to do the exact same thing as image left, except I'm going to float it to the right-hand side. And put my margin to my left-hand side. Once again, just 10 pixels. I will sometimes also put an extra margin on the bottom just to ensure that the text doesn't kind of butt up against the bottom. You just have to see on that one. I can't have both an image left and an image right at the same time on the same image, so I'll choose image right here. Resize, you notice that everything stays the same, but my image now goes to my right-hand side, and my description list is on my left-hand side. So it fixed that, or just changed that issue. How big an image you want to have and where you want to place it kind of depends upon how it's being used. Some websites always go left-hand justify. Sometimes they'll even go a little bit off. If you look at like CNN's website, a lot of times their images are hanging outside. They use a negative margin. They got a big blank space kind of off the left-hand side of their text, and they fill that with an image or part of an image to help it stand out. Excuse me. Some websites, they put the image on the right-hand side. That's what I prefer. Sometimes you'll see them kind of like ping-pong back and forth. There are some really good, rules or strong suggestions, I would call them, about how to use images. You want to use them based on, can you get people to act like they're like looking at you? And in this case, they're looking kind of towards the center, kind of at each other. So that's a little bit different. But can you have them looking at you? Can you have them looking toward the direction you want your reader to look? So if the person is kind of like a profile, you want the profile facing the text so that That way the person goes, what are they looking at? Oh, there's a whole bunch of text there I need to read. So these aren't like rules like you're not going to break the website or at all if you don't do this, but it's just kind of good design guidelines that people can use for building them. And that's why I have those 3 rules, is because I never know which one or ones I'm going to use. The IMG gets used on all images. The 2 classes that work with the images, those only work if you apply the class. So sometimes I need the class, sometimes I don't. In the meantime, I can also do like an image center, which will center the image if it needs to be centered. There's a couple different ways that you can do that if you need to. Now, there's some other things that you can do depending upon how you're working on making your images. One, and a good example is this rounded image. And if you like to have a rounded image, that means just rounding the corners a little bit, you can do this by saying your border radius. So if I say image round, and there's nothing special about this name, it's just the name I gave the class. If I might say border radius, and I'm going to add this class. So I'm going to take my existing class. This is one because they don't conflict with each other. I can add multiple classes to the same element. And it's real minor, but you'll notice that little curvature of those corners. Okay, I don't know if you can see. I'm going to just make this a little bit more pronounced. I wouldn't probably do this in a regular website unless I really needed it, but just to make it more pronounced. Some people really, really like these rounded corners. Some people like the circular. Um, so we'll take an image like this and they want, hey, wouldn't it be great if it was just a big circle? To do that, I can simply say 50%. Now, this shows it as an oval because I had a rectangular image. If it was square, it would be a circle. And that's, how a lot of these like badges and stuff like that, or profile photos on social media sites, that's all they do. They take a square image and they say border, and now you have this. So it depends upon how big your image is to start with, what you define your radius. You can define your radius as a percentage, like I did 50% here, or you can set it like an absolute 10 pixels, 20 pixels, if you know that that's going to be enough. Like I said, it's usually just a little bit of a design flair as far as that goes. The other thing I can do is I can specify a pseudo class. And let me show you what we're going to do with this. I come up here to my regular image. Make sure I spelled that right. Okay, yes. So I set my opacity to 0.8, which is 80%. Okay, this gets assigned to it. If you notice, it's just a little bit dimmer, a little bit washed out. If I roll over it, you notice it becomes just a little bit more vibrant. So this is something that some people will do, especially if they want to use an image as like a button. I can maybe change like a border color, or I can assign a different background color for wherever a background color is going to show, that type of thing. I can use this pseudo class of hover, which we've used on links before. You've probably seen it, you remember it, use it on a link, but I can use it on any tag technically. And so this just allows me to kind of give a little bit extra like oof that I can do, make it stand out. I saw a good example of this being used the other day where they hid the caption. And then when it came over, the caption, if you did a rollover, the caption appeared like, there we go. So you can kind of see what it was. So it makes for some interesting things that you can do with the image. And I can, once again, I can tweak these. There's nothing magical about 0.8. I can have 0.5. Just 0.5 is going to make this even that much more washed out. But then when I roll over, I can see it. I've seen this done in image galleries. I've seen it done if the image is designed to be clicked on, but maybe they're using JavaScript to control it instead of a link. So I can give little hints that, hey, this is a clickable item. So there's a lot of different things that I can do as far as that goes with my CSS. But like I said, that's just my image tag, how I style it with CSS. It shows us the ability to put multiple classes on the same tag. And I also did the pseudo class, hover pseudo class. Any questions on the image as far as how that works, or using the tag with the HTML or anything like that?
Nope.
Okay. Let me show you a little bit more just about the images, just because I want to kind of give you some heads up as to what's involved with some of these things. All right, so I don't need that one. Okay. So I told you that there was different types of images, and this is a JPEG. And JPEG stands for, I think it's Joint Graphics Project or something like that. No, that's not it. Jet Propulsion. I can't remember. Anyway, it's a big fancy tag. JPEG is what's known as a lossy quality image. And what that means is that it actually takes approximations and says, well, based upon the quality, I can say what my next pixel looks like, or I can say what 2 pixels away looks like, and interpolate what the difference might be. Or I might say what my image 10 pixels looks away like, and guess at what the ones in between are. And it uses this fancy algorithm to figure it out. We don't have to know how that works. But what you'll see is as the quality goes down, it becomes more and more blocky. As the quality goes down, so does my file size, which makes it really fast to download, but at that trade-off in quality. And so I need to figure out where that fine point is. Well, there's other types of images I can use. So if I come here and say File, Save As, I can see a whole long list of different files. Photoshop even has even more. If I choose PNG, for example, PNG stands for Portable Graphics Network. So if I go and I say, let me save this real quick. If I save it as, I'm just going to save as 24-bit. 32-bit is the same as 24 as far as number of colors, what you can see. The difference is that I have a transparency associated with it. So I can have like transparent parts to my image. Okay. So if I save it here, remember, exact same size as my JPEG. And then come over to my images. Here is 1926 751 is a JPEG, 74 kilobytes. The exact same file as a PNG is 500 kilobytes. So you're talking 7 times larger, approximately. That's a pretty significant increasement. You might say, well, why would I ever want to use PNG then? That doesn't make sense. Well, PNG works really good if I have an image where I have lots of the same colors repeating. And that's because it uses what they know as a lossless form of compression. So I take my images, I compress the file internally, kind of like if I was using like WinZip or something like that, or RAW or something, where I need to compress and make the file smaller. But it's still readable, and depending upon and with a lossless compression, I'm not going to lose any quality whatsoever. Every time I make a copy of it, it's exactly the same as it was when I first created it hundreds of years ago. or 5 years ago, or 5 minutes ago, depending upon how old that file is, it seems. So I get that advantage. The downside is it does not handle photos as well. Too many color variations. So let's take an example of what this is going to look like if I open up one of those PNG files. So here's the PNG file. Notice a little black and white checkerboard. That means that's a transparent section for this. I'm going to choose to resize because it's too big once again. I'll once again make this 750 by 750. If I save it as a 24-bit, notice I'm at 148K versus 612. Okay, but I say it as 24-bit. 24-bit is not transparent. So if I come over here and view it in my images, it's shown a white background, but it's actually white. It's not transparent. If I come here though and say it was a PNG, yes, I might say it was a 32-bit, which now notice I have my transparent background, but my file size went up. Okay, more data to store, file size is going to go up. I could say, let me go down to 8-bit. 8-bit says, you know what? I get a smaller file, and now 73K compared to 147 for the 24, 160 for the 32. With an 8-bit image, instead of having all of my colors, I have a smaller subset. When I have all of my colors in like a 24-bit image, I've got like 16 point something million colors. 8-bit limits me to 256. But for an image like this, do I need more than that? Probably not. I could even go down to 4-bit, which takes me smaller. But notice I have like little dots and my background went away. I have little dots here on the sleeve. Notice that. Dots up here on the lapel. That's where it says I've got two images which are, or two colors which are too close. So I'm going to make it all one, but I'm going to put a little dot to make it look like the other. Okay. It's actually a process called dithering, and it makes the image not look as clean. If I have the 8-bit, notice that most of my dithering goes away. Okay, so that's where having a PNG becomes really beneficial, is if I have something like this where I'm dealing with a lot of solid colors, or if I'm using like a bar chart and you put a chart up and here's a bar chart or a line chart or a pie chart or a graph or something like that, something that's got a lot of solid colors, PNG works really, really well for that. Before we had PNG, we had something called GIF, and GIF isn't used nearly as much anymore. It still is used some. Sometimes it's just old throwbacks. Sometimes it's part of the regular website. It just kind of depends. But PNG came out because of a major problem in GIF. And GIF, sometimes you'll hear it pronounced GIF. But the GIF file had a major issue, and that was it was actually it accidentally, believe it or not, it accidentally infringed on someone's copyright. There is a copyright for a compression algorithm out there, and GIF wound up using it without knowing it. They said, "Oh, here's a great way to store stuff," but it wound up infringing on it. So we had to come up with a different way. At this point, the copyright has expired. No one can renew it. So you're not going to run into a copyright issue with GIFs anymore. But a lot of people have started to make the PNG change. And so we've just kind of kept with it. It's got some nice things because it can display more colors if it needs to. That 32-bit with transparency, even though it's really big, blends it in nice. With the 8-bit, you're either transparent or you're not. With the 8-bit, you're limited to 256 colors instead of the 16 point something million. So there are some limitations, but there's also some opportunities, if you would, inside of the different sizes that it provides you. And that just makes it really helpful for when you're building out something like this. Um, so yeah, here's a 74 kilobyte size versus you know, the original 612. And part of this because we resized it, part of it's because we went to 8-bit instead of 32, although it might have been 8-bit originally. Just different things to kind of look at. With any type of web designer, no matter who you are, even if you're not a real graphics person who needs Photoshop and Illustrator and all that type of stuff, having something like a Paint.net so you can resize images on your own, to crop them, to say, hey, you know what? I really only need this person here on my left, so why am I going to include everyone else? I want to just select her, make sure I'm not going to get anything else, and come in here and crop this selection. Now, when I've got it really cropped nice and tight, now that it's cropped, this file is going to be a lot smaller again. So instead of 64, or excuse me, instead of 74, now it's 24 kilobytes in size. Because being able to crop out things I don't need, be able to resize things, be able to change the file it's saved in. This is why you need some sort of visual editing tool, because as a developer, this is something that gets used all the time. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind and back of your mind as you're working on stuff. And we can go from there. Do you have any other questions about, or do you have any questions about the image editing or why you want something like that?
Nope.
All right. Well, that's all I had for today. We're done just a few minutes early. So that's, aces as far as that goes. I forgot to send out an email to the class the other day. Karen, did you say you had a Mac or did you had a PC window machine?
That's not Windows.
You got Windows. So yeah, so you can download that paint.net and take your images and work with that. That works real easily. If you had Mac, I'd have to go and kind of do a little bit of research and see what's out there for that. But just kind of keep an eye on the email, like I said, that I'll be sending out, hopefully in just a little bit. And that'll give you more information. And then, like I said, someone asked for a link for this, so this will go out as soon as this gets posted there as well. So just try and keep everything updated for everyone.